Tidewater Classical Academy, a growing classical Christian school in Virginia Beach, is currently enrolling for the 2015-16 school year. Tidewater Classical Academy was founded in 2007 to provide high-quality classical Christian education at an affordable rate, accessible to all families. They provide mastery of the tools of learning and seek to infuse a genuinely biblical worldview in everything they do. At TCA, academic excellence is coupled with character development, and students are trained to be critical thinkers. Their staff is made up of committed Christians who take delight in pouring their own lives into the lives of the students. TCA provides a unique half-day class schedule with a full-day effort. They're an affordable option for families seeking high-quality education centered on biblical truth. Call 427-5683. That's 427-5683 for more information or to schedule a tour. And visit tidewaterclassical.com.
Good afternoon. This is George Yates, and I'm here with Justice for All for another hour from 2 to 3 here on 1650 AM, K-Talk Radio here in Portsmouth, Virginia. And as every Saturday, I'm here from 2 to 3, and this has been a great time having this show for the last 18 months. I'm going to take a little sabbatical here after today's show, but we're going to take a few weeks off here. And so those of you that have been listening to my show for the last 18 months, if you don't hear me on next Saturday, it's because I'm taking a little break, need a little vacation from the show for a while. Doing live shows every Saturday afternoon for the last 18 months, I'm taking a little break here. But it's a great show to take a break on because I've got a very cool guest today. His name is Ivan Goldman, and he's a writer and got a very good resume, New York Times bestselling author. He joins us here from California today, and he's the author of a book called Sick Justice, among other books. We can talk about some of Ivan's other books, but as a criminal defense lawyer for the last 25 years, I'm in and out of courtrooms. I was in federal court yesterday. I was in a bunch of different state courts this week, and I can tell you that some of the things that we see in the criminal justice system in practice every single day makes the title of this book here just more and more appropriate. The title of Ivan Goldman's new book is called Sick Justice. And it's a term that was coined by Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, describing, I guess Ivan's going to explain to us exactly how that term sick justice came about. The name of the book is Sick Justice Inside the American Gulag. And those of us that are in the court systems every day, know exactly what Mr. Goldman is talking about. And he's written an incredible book here, which you just go through page after page after page of horrors that he's describing in the American justice system. And he calls it the American Gulag. And so for those of us that listen to my show every week, and you know that some of my guests are law professors and lawyers from all over the country. Last week we had the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Today, Mr. Goldman is a non-lawyer, but he comes to us today and gives us a incredible perspective on the American justice system, and it's not a particularly favorable one. So welcome to the show, Ivan.
Thank you, George. It's good to be here.
This book is great. I read your. Why don't you tell our guests, our listeners, really how you came to get the idea for this book? You described that you actually were on your way to be writing another novel, and you were involved in a criminal case, I guess, with a family member or a close family friend, and you saw how they were treated in the justice system, and you said, "Oh my God, I need to write about this."
Yeah, that's pretty much that is the way it happened. I was halfway through my fifth novel. And when I was sitting in court, I just saw something that was so incredibly strange, and I think it would be strange to anybody except people who work in the courts every day. They're just used to seeing this. There was a man about 50 years old who was being sentenced to 2 years under a plea bargain. And the judge asked the prosecutor, he said, I see that this Mr. whatever his name was had a prior offense many years ago and was in prison for that. What was that offense? And the prosecutor started looking through. Hang on, I'm going to switch phones here. He started looking through a bunch of papers, couldn't find it, and he said, well, it was nothing. It was like this. It was nothing serious. And I said, holy smoke, it was like this. It was nothing serious. They're sending this guy to prison for 2 years for something they're calling nothing serious. And like the last one. And it struck me that they just see this so much that they don't realize it's crazy. And that really was the impetus for the book.
So that got you started, and then how did you get started? Where was your focus? You got the name for the book, Sick Justice. That's the name of your book. It's called Sick Justice Inside the American Gulag. And when you hear the term Gulag, you think about the Soviet Union and their prisons of no return, Siberian prisons, and so on. Where did you got the idea for the book? So where did you go from there? How did you get started on this project?
Well, when I started looking into it, I came across a quote from Justice Kennedy, conservative justice, generally speaking, but
the swing justice they call him.
Yeah, the swing justice. You never know exactly which way it's going to go, or often you don't. And he was. It involved a case in which he saw there's a very powerful union in California. Some say the most powerful union in the state, and that's the prison guard union, because they really use their money. And they were. It turned out were a moving force behind the three strikes law that could put people away in prison for the rest of their lives for a small offense if it's the third offense. And he said, "This is," Justice Kennedy said, "This is sick." that these guys are pressing to put more people in prison, basically, so they can buy RVs and put boats, big boats in their driveway. They're just kind of trading in bodies.
So it seemed like your first foray into this was a realization that the mass incarceration of American wrongdoers, if you will, is a profit center for people. We got private prison companies. We've got prison guard unions that benefit by the more prisoners. Is that that was kind of how you got started in realizing how sick the whole thing was?
Yeah, well, to be a little more specific, and it was a long time boxing writer. I wrote a column for Ring magazine, and
wow, that must have been fun.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm still a boxing writer, but I'm not going to advertise. I'm online on a boxing site. I'm not with Ring anymore, but I have a friend whose name is George Allen. It was just basically, when you're a boxing writer, you come across the prison system. We have fighters, pro fighters generally come from lower socioeconomic strata, and they very often, the getting in the ring kind of cures them of crime, because they get out all their aggression in the tough training and in the ring. But we still see it. We see guys who come out of the when they finish their career, they've spent all their money. They bought all the nice suits and the diamond rings, and now they're broke, and they go back to the streets, and they don't know anything else other than maybe standing on the corner and selling crack. So they kind of, you see them at both ends of their careers. You see fighters like Bernard Hopkins, learned prize fighting in prison and then went completely straight. And then you see other people who end up in prison after their careers. So you
of course,
see
they're
them
suffering from dementia, many of them, right?
Yeah, and you see them coming and going, and you see, yes, you do see dementia. But I mentioned this friend of mine, James Allen. He is a pro fighter, and he was. I'm in Los Angeles, and he is a former member of the Crips, and he's a former drug dealer, and he had become a fighter, and went straight. When he became a fighter, he started going to church, he got engaged, he got a job, 40-hour-a-week job, and he was living a straight life. And somebody had informed on him, which is very often the case, for dealing drugs, it's complicated, 2 years earlier. So basically, when they get an informant, the informant is almost always someone who is involved in the criminal life. They've caught him, and they say, "All right, who can you give me?" Now, they'll try to give them somebody who won't get them hurt or killed. Now, James was no longer in the gang life, no longer in the criminal life, so he was safe. You could turn him in, and so they turned in James. You don't even know the name of the informant. James ended up doing 8 years in the federal system. So what they did was they took a guy who had gone straight, an ex-criminal, and put him in for a long time. And maybe the guy who turned him in walked.
Well, he might have gotten a substantial assistance motion or something like that and got his time cut in half or 40%
Right, he got something.
Like yeah,
I don't know what he got because they didn't even have to give us his name.
Now, you talk about James Allen in Chapter 10 of your book, Mongo and Squeaky. Is that's, of course, a different you're talking more about the Wackenhut employees in that chapter. It's pretty interesting. But go ahead. Talk more. So go ahead. You're talking about James Allen.
Well, I had been, I've also been a reporter for the Washington Post, an editor for the LA Times, and so, and not a sports writer. It's a general assignment person. So a lot of what I'd covered was in the criminal justice system, and I'd been a police reporter. And I'd been in and out of a lot of jails and prisons in the course of my work, as I'm sure you have, George. And I was used to a certain standard of professionalism. And when I went to visit James Allen with his trainer, Charlie Gergen, we drove, I think it was almost 3 hours out of L.A. to get to this this prison out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what it was. And it turned out to be a private prison. And I found none of the professionalism that I was used to. And it's just nuts. We couldn't get in. They wouldn't let us in to visit James. They decided they didn't like my pants. I was wearing khaki pants. And I had tried to find out the rules of the prison before I went there, and I couldn't find them out. I mean, I'd made call, because I knew, what are the visiting hours? What can you bring? There are questions, and I couldn't get them answered. So anyway, they didn't let us in, and it goes. The story goes on, but they they were malicious and sadistic, and we hadn't done anything to deserve that. And basically waited until it was too late. The clock struck a certain time, 2 o'clock, whatever it is, and they spent all that time talking to us. And then when I had found a way, then let Charlie in. He's got the right pants. No, now it's too late, and they just sent us away. I mean, we drove 5 hours round trip, and they had a nice time. I called them Mongo and Squeaky because, for physical characteristics of the two guards. But I'd never seen anything so unprofessional in a prison or a jail. I'd never come across that. I mean, usually the people working there they're not out to play these kinds of games with you. It was nuts, and it was a private prison. Wackenhut no longer it's one of these corporations that's changed names and been absorbed into other corporations, and they're still running prisons, but under some other name that escapes me.
Well, now this was a couple of years before you even got around to writing this book. So when you got your idea for the book and started doing some research, you're already able to draw on some experiences that you'd already had and apparently had filed away mentally for later use.
Absolutely.
Like, you said, wait a minute, one of these days I'm going to write something about this private prison and what nonsense it is.
Well, actually, I wrote about it at the time. At that time, I was a columnist for Ring, and I put that in a column. And it
was appropriate because it was about a fighter that you were going to see. So
exactly,
because
he was
context.
a fighter, so I was able to get that. But I forget why now, but somehow I was in touch with a public relations guy from the Bureau of Prisons, and because this was James was a federal inmate, and this guy had no interest at all in reforming what they were doing so that these things wouldn't happen to people. I'm sure they did this to other people too, but in my case, I was writing for a magazine. But the public relations guy had only one mission, and that was to try and to make them look not so bad. But they have no interest in improvement.
If you've just joined us, I'm here with writer Ivan Goldman, and we're talking about his book, Sick Justice. Now, this book has been out for a couple of years now. Is that right, Ivan?
Yeah, that's right. Correct.
And, of course, you can get this book if you've just joined us. This is George Yates here with Justice for All, and we're talking about his book, Sick Justice, Inside the American Gulag, and you can get it wherever books are sold, and I'm sure on the Barnes & Noble and, all those online booksellers, Amazon and so on. But listen, how does one go about researching and writing a book like this? When you get the idea for it, you walked out of the courtroom that day, you were in the middle of a novel, you saw this kind of comment made about this not-so-serious offense that got a guy in jail for 2 years, and you thought, well, 2 years of jail for something that's not so serious. So how do you go about a writer like you? Do you start just getting on the phone and doing interviews? Do you go on the internet and start looking up articles? Where do you get your data? It's very well researched. It's very well footnoted, this book. How does a writer like you go about writing a book like this, research?
Well, the first thing I did was I called my agent, Sally Van Heetsma, and I said, because I relied on her judgment to some extent, do you think this is a good idea for a book, or am I totally off the wall? And she said, I think it's a good idea. And then you write a proposal. And then when you write a proposal to send to publishers, then they demand a chapter or two with the proposal. You have to put a lot of work into writing a proposal. So at that point, I already had some contacts. For instance,
you already had the Mongo and Squeaky I
had
chapter.
Mongo and Squeaky, and a friend of mine is Pat Russell, who's kind of a famous California referee. You've seen him on HBO and Showtime many times. And Pat is a former detective who worked for the prosecutor in San Diego County. So, I had stories from him about weird things that he'd seen. And, so I knew people like that. And then I started making, and so you take the people and then they give you other people, and you start making calls. Who else knows something? And one person leads you to another person. And basically in this particular topic, everybody wanted to unload on me, because everybody had seen so much awful stuff.
Everybody had a story to tell.
Everybody had more than one story to tell. So I didn't have, and I'm sure you have stories to tell. And when you have over 2 million people locked up, which we do, that's a lot of people. As I point out, that's about the number of people in Cleveland, or Houston. It was, Cleveland is smaller than that. Houston's bigger. Houston is our third largest city. It's about as big as Houston. That's a lot of people. When you're in that kind of wholesale imprisonment, it's not not going to be sweet. Mistakes will be made, as politicians say, and what happened? Mistakes are made both ways. You have people doing life who should have got probation,
right?
And you have people who walk away who are basically animals who should be doing life,
right?
Because they're dangerous. I'm not nuts. I know there are dangerous people out there. At least I hope I'm not nuts. The trick is to get the right ones punished, and the rest of the people. Sometimes there are certain people you can scare the heck out of them with a night in jail, and it'll teach them a lesson. You don't need to put them in for 5 years.
I know it's amazing to me. Talk about. I've probably got some stories just from this last week. Just yesterday, I saw a client go to prison for 13 years. I see young men that are 18 years old that should get deferred findings on little nothing crimes. They're 18, and then you ask the judge, can you please continue this case for a year, put him on probation so he doesn't have a criminal record, and give him a chance. And the judge goes, no, gives him a conviction. So he's 18 years old, and he's already got one hand tied behind his back trying to get a job going forward because he's got these two little crimes on his record. He's now got a criminal record, and there's just not enough what's the word? Compassion or mercy anymore. It's really swung to the right. You've seen that, I'm sure, in the course of your researching what has happened in the justice system and how the punishment level has just been ratcheted up. And we there's a lot of talk lately amongst politicians on the left and the right about this mass incarceration. We need to do we need to make some changes, but it's really not happening yet. There's talk about it, but it's not happened. You go into the courts, and it's people are just getting locked up right and left. And like I said, I'm not going to sit here and you're the guest today, not me. But if I were to sit here, I could tell stories all day long about and talk about disparities. I remember sitting in court one day not that long ago. On a case when I saw a young man that he'd done all this community service. He had 20 family members sitting over there. He'd done something wrong. The guidelines called for 6 years to serve. He was 19 years old. It was the most impassioned, he'd done about 1,000 hours of community service to make up for his offense. Judge gives him 6 years. And it was just unbelievable that he would got 6 years for something as silly as what he'd done. He'd waved a gun at somebody, but nobody had been injured. 6 years. And I sat there and I watched it and I said, you've got to be kidding me that judge is going to give him 6 years. But I see this every day, and I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I thought of a story just like that where the kid did 12 years and the prosecutor was shooting for 16. But I don't mean to outdo you. I wish we didn't have these stories. But you said something interesting, George, about conservatives and liberals are kind of lining up to some extent on this one, and that's right. Absolutely the truth. They're
because of the cost. The conservatives think it costs too much. The liberals are do-gooders that want to let people out of jail because they think they're doing too much time. The conservatives would love to leave them locked up for even longer, but they don't want to pay for them.
Well, that's pretty much true. But the conservative movement has got. You can look at it like this: it's got these authoritarians that want to lock people away, but it's also got libertarians.
Right,
that think,
exactly.
let him go, So
Right.
he's smoking a little grass, God bless him. Let him, so,
Right.
Yeah,
a lot of liberals and conservatives, a lot of Tea Party people and liberals have a lot more in common than you would believe. But I think that if everybody found that out, then there wouldn't be as much contributions. I think that the left benefits by hating the right, and the right benefits by hating the left. Heaven forbid that the left and the right would get together on anything.
Yeah. They may in this next session of Congress. Congress won't do anything now, which is kind of funny. I mean, what are we paying them? I don't remember. $175,000 a year. They're not going to do anything until after the election. So
after your publisher came back and said, okay, talk to your agent, and said that sounds like a pretty good idea. How long did you spend researching and writing this book? What was your next step?
Well, then I had to write these chapters and write the outline. And that took me at least 2 months. So that's 2 months of work, and no one's paid me a nickel. So
no advance, huh?
Yeah. Well, you can't get an advance until you. I did get an advance, but you can't get an advance until you get a publisher, and you can't get a publisher till you write your book. Now, I have to point out that that doesn't happen to Stephen King.
No.
he calls his agent and says, I want to write a novel on whatever, and then his agent talks to the publisher, and they decide, well, should we give him $1 million or $2 million or $1.5 million? But incidentally, Stephen King is a fine writer, and I don't say that because I say, oh, he's a terrible writer. This shouldn't happen. I like to see talented people make good, and he's a talented guy, and he made good. But anyway, I'm not in the Stephen King class. I have to write a proposal before I get any money, and by that time I'd done quite a lot of the work. So really, by the time you get a publisher, you're maybe a third of the way there. And if you get a publisher, the problem is, in so many cases, writers don't get a publisher.
Of course, you keep your writing going. I mean, because you still you have a blog, and you write occasionally for you've written for The Nation and Rolling Stone and the New York Times. You've written some other novels.
I've even written for the National Review. I've even written for conservative organs. So, I had other stuff going at the same time. That's right, George. And the novel I was writing that I put down, I can tell you that's my latest book, because when I finished Sick Justice, I finished my novel called The Debtor Class.
Right, I've got that at home, and I got that along with this one, and I picked that up the other day. Now, that's a novel, which you must have done a lot of research for that by doing this book, right?
Actually, I didn't do a lot of research because these were just people I'd known, through from being a boxing writer who introduced me to other people, and I took some real life stuff and put it into the book. One of the
and now that book just came out in 2015. That book, or is it?
Yeah, it came out in April.
So,
and one of the characters is an ex-convict called Bento, and I point out some of the things he's got to face because our screwy laws, for instance, we have, if you're an ex-drug offender, you can't get public housing. You can't get, if you want to go to school, you can't get a student loan. There are all sorts of things you just can't get because you're an ex-drug offender. Okay, people say, well, it serves them right. Well, but if it serves them right, how come a rapist or a murderer can get these things? So it's because the law is screwy.
Right.
It's because when there was a Welfare Reform Act that was written, I think it was in 1996. Phil Graham of Texas got this. He was a Democrat at the time, changed parties later. A light bulb went off in his head and said, "Let's exclude all these drug felons," so they can't get anything. And it just went into the law, and the law.
And this would be just a possession or a drug seller?
That's a good question. I seem to recall it would it was drug possession because under our law, which has not changed, as you know, George, in most states, maybe in all the states, possession of heroin, for instance, or possession of cocaine is an automatic felony.
Oh, yeah.
There's no such thing as a misdemeanor heroin possession.
You get first offender, so you can sometimes get it off your record if it's a first offense. But then if you, let's say, violate the probation and then get the conviction, which so many people do because it's an addiction and they can't always quit. They try and they can't quit. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 times, to quit these drugs. And the problem is the poor people don't always get the benefit of these fancy rehab facilities. I mean, the only way you get rehab when you're poor is to go to jail. My wealthier clients can go off to rehab facilities and keep going back until they eventually get clean, but the poor people end up having to do it from the jail, and there's not very good drug treatment in the jail. So they get out, they're on probation, they violate, they get back, they get the conviction, and now it is a conviction for good because they can't get past it. And eventually they get clean, some of them, but it's a hard process. We need to really stop. We need to decriminalize this whole drug thing and take it out of the jails and put it more into a rehab situation. Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir, and so am I. Those two, something like half. It is half of the people in our federal prison system, for instance, are there for drugs. Some of these incidents are just so terrible. But getting people for drugs, arresting them for drugs, that's what I call low-hanging fruit, because it's just it's an open and shut case. Okay, you had a balloon of heroin. It's very, it's very, very simple to prove. There's no, they can't fight it. Okay, I had a balloon of heroin.
Right.
But from there, it can go on to something much worse. In 2008, they caught just a whole nest of New York City cops were doing what they call attaching bodies to drugs. These guys would go into a disco with drugs that they had taken off drug offenders. And arrest people who didn't have drugs on them, and then say they did. And they would do this when they needed to show more busts on their record, that they, we're not arresting enough people, and they would go in and frame innocent people. I mean, by the carload. They were doing this over and over until they finally got caught. And when they got this guy to turn evidence against his buddy cops, he said, he was asked on the stand, well, didn't you feel bad about this? He said, no, we just looked at it like we were attaching bodies to the drugs. And, and that's the problem with that low-hanging fruit. Sometimes cops will say, well, maybe he's not carrying drugs now, but he probably carries drugs some of the time. So I'll just say he was carrying drugs, and that's that. Then they go away. They say that's a conviction. I mean, how do you fight it? It's your word against the cops. So it's this low-hanging fruit concept also makes criminals of police in some instances. And, of course, we have no way to measure how often that happens. We don't know. We tried to figure out how many innocent people are locked up. Well, we know there are a fair number because of the Innocence Project, which I'm sure you're aware of, George. Because
they've been on my show. I've had Innocence Project on here a couple
they
times.
They find people that they can prove this guy.
But the problem with Innocence Project is they're so overwhelmed with requests from prisoners, and the only way. And they have a very elaborate screening process, and the only way they've got to have DNA or something.
It's got to be DNA.
Yeah, if it gets down to the credibility.
You don't always have the DNA.
Yeah, I mean, it's our cops' word against theirs. They can't get involved in that. There's no way they can definitively prove innocence with that. So it is. I'll tell you, it is very tough as a defense lawyer when it's your client is saying, well, that cop's not telling the truth, and I'm going, okay, so now how are we going to, and it's funny, you can't ever win a case in front of a judge if it's a credibility case with a cop. There you've got a judge and there's 8 other cops sitting there waiting to hear their police court case, and here's and you're going to say, okay, and your honor goes, I'm going to find that the officer's case is not credible. I mean, he's going to say that in front of 10 cops sitting over there about to try their cases, so it just doesn't ever happen in real life, never. The only way you win a case where you got a credibility case with a cop would be in front of a jury. Juries don't have any problem with not believing cops. I mean, a lot of prosecutors love to come in and think that juries by nature believe cops. It just isn't so. I mean, O.J. Simpson is just a drop in the bucket compared to that. I mean, there are many, many cases. But you can win a case if a credibility case, but only in front of a jury, not in front of a judge. And certainly Innocence Project can't do anything about a conviction if it's based upon, that kind of, who do you believe kind of stuff. So we got many people sitting, and the eyewitness identification stuff too. Unless you get some DNA later on, you're stuck with that. It's a tragedy that there's some cases out there where people probably are innocent, but there wasn't a kind of case that lended itself to any kind of a DNA from the get-go. Yeah,
we're getting into the realm here of what I call runaway prosecutors, and one reason, even when you change the law, you legislate it so this guy won't. We don't have to give him, 20 years. We've got to give him 8 years, for a minimum sentence. It's still an 8-year minimum sentence.
Which is a ridiculous amount of time. Even then,
yeah,
I love how...
Which is a much longer time than most people realize.
Oh, my God.
And so what happens is the prosecutors, as you know, by deciding what to charge the person with, they pretty much decide how long this person is going away. They almost always have a choice. They can look at the statutes. I can charge them with this, or I can charge them with that, and they know the penalties for those statutes.
Oh yeah,
and they also know that 90% or more of cases never go to trial. So if they charge you with the tougher offense, you're going to do more time, and that's it.
Because the legislatures have, in effect, in the last 20, 30 years, passed so many laws, both federal and in state courts now, where there's mandatory minimums for this gun charge and mandatory minimums for this possession charge and mandatory minimum for that, where the judge's hands are tied. If the prosecutor decides to bring the charge, the judge can't suspend the time. He's got to give the guy 2 or 3 years. So the prosecutor can, and we get these ridiculous offenses. Let's say some guy does a home invasion. I mean, it's a terrible crime. He's got a gun, and there's three people there. All right, so in Virginia, we've got a 3-year mandatory minimum use a crime with a gun, and 5 for a subsequent offense. So if you go in and you rob 3 people, you're going to get 3 years for the first guy, and you're going to get 5 each for the second and third guy. So you didn't even hurt anybody, and the guy took $100 worth of weed and left. He's looking at a mandatory minimum of 13 years on the gun counts alone, not counting anything else. 13 years for the one crime. Because it's 3 on the first and 5 on the second,
right,
too.
But the prosecutor could have found something else.
Well, and in fact, they often do. The prosecutor will come to you, and that's when you, as the defense lawyer, are going, "Come on, let him plead to the one count and do the 3-year mandatory, and let's drop the next 2." And sometimes they'll do that, but sometimes they won't. Or what if there's 3 people there, and they said, "Okay, I want you to go get into the closet while we're looking through the house." Well, now you've robbed them and abducted them, so now you've got 3 years on the gun charge, 2 years, 5 years each on the second, and now because you've abducted them and put them in the closet, now you get 3 more, 15 more years. So now you're looking at mandatory minimum. Well, do the math, and it can get ridiculous. It can get up to where you're looking at 94 years or whatever just on the gun charges because you've committed crimes against several people and maybe you've moved them around a little bit. So,
well, I found so many of these cases, but there's one case I remember, and that's the case of Chris Martinez, because I knew this kid before he went to prison. And it's the kind of case you're talking about. It's a home invasion, but it wasn't really a home invasion. I know the kid. I knew the kid before he went to prison. He's not a dangerous kid. He was drunk. He was with the wrong people. He was driving down the street, and there was an open garage, and he went into the open garage as a kind of a prank and wheeled out an old rusty bicycle that had it had no tires on it. And then someone yelled down from an upper floor, "Hey, where are you going?" He laughed, he dropped the bike, got back in the car, and that was the end of it, he thought. But then one of the guys he was in the car with later got caught for something. I don't know. I think it was probably possession of something. And the cops say, "Okay, who can you give us?" They gave him Chris Martinez. Now, this was called a home invasion, and it was daylight. As you know, there's daylight. If you go in at certain times and you're a burglar at certain times of the day, it's a tougher it's a tougher offense, a more serious offense. Now, this going into this open garage, the law treated that under this offense as though he'd gone into a living room while the people were sitting there watching TV and grabbed stuff off jewelry off their necks. But that's not what happened. But they were pressing him to accept 10 years on this offense.
10 years for going into a garage and taking a bicycle and then not even taking it.
And they said, if you don't take the 10, we're going to press for 20. And he finally, his mother had no money, but she raised the money and got him another lawyer, and the lawyer got him 4 years. He did 4 years for that bicycle.
4 years, even then, 4 years.
4 years for a bicycle.
How old was he?
Pardon?
How old was this kid?
Oh, he was about 23.
And had he ever done time before?
He had done. He had not done time, but he had a what we call a strike in California. It had to do with a bad check, as I recall, a nonviolent crime.
A nonviolent. So we're going to put this kid in a prison for 4 years with grown men, a lot older than him, a lot more violent, and then give him a felony record, and then when he gets out in 4 years, does California have parole? On a 4 year sentence.
We do have parole. He did 4 years. I mean, the sentence was longer.
4 years for stealing a bike.
But he also had to accept a strike. He now has 2 strikes.
So that was his second strike. Yeah.
When they let him go on the check charge, they said, "All right, we're going to let you go for time served." He'd done about 2 or 3 months in county jail, but you got to accept a strike. That was part of the plea bargain. He said, right. "Okay, I accept the strike." When you're living in a county jail, you'll accept anything to get out.
Oh yeah.
So he now has 2 strikes. And,
Now, what's the California 3 strikes law now? If he gets a 3rd strike, what does that mean?
It means 25 to life, as I recall.
So how many people are locked up in California under that 3 strikes law? A lot of people like this Chris Martinez, huh? You mean if he wrote another bad check, that'd be a 3rd strike? Or would it have to be a violent crime?
Since then, we have passed legislation so that some of these people can get out. But and some of them, it's the law is a little more humanized since then. But what happens then is you get people for the same exact offense in the same prison, maybe in the same cell block, and one guy's doing 25 to life, and the other guy's doing 2 years. And this does not make for good citizens. When these cons, when they see this, they say, all right, this system is not fair. I have no respect for it. How can you get them to respect the law when they're living in this crazy fantasy world? I mean, they see what's going on. They're not all stupid. So it's just kind of a roll of the dice.
Well, I was just about to use that term. It's amazing. We must have been telepathic because you hear that expression a lot, roll of the dice. And that was rolling around in my head right before you said it, that we have this system, and we lawyers use that from time to time. We'll say, well, you can plead to this or da-da-da, or you can roll the dice and go in front of a jury. You're rolling the dice. You're taking your chances, and you just don't know what you're going to get. A jury of your peers. Well, there's certainly not going to be a jury of your peers, but and that's what we've just been talking for the last hour with Ivan Goldman. He's an accomplished writer, and he writes for Boxing for Ring Magazine, and he's written for The Nation, Rolling Stone, and he's written this very entertaining documentary book called Sick Justice: Inside the American Gulag. We've been talking for about the last hour. How much time have we got left on our show here today, Mr. D? I got about 10 minutes. So Ivan, we got about 10 minutes left in the next 5 minutes or so. What do you, your book, Sick Justice, have you got any thoughts as to what should be, as a, not a lawyer, but a non-participant in the legal system, what should we do? What kind of reforms do you think should be instituted in our system to make it more fair and less draconian? Oh, I loved your chapter on draconian. I never knew where draconian came from. Now I know. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I had to look it up myself, but it came from a terrible Roman dictator who passed a law. Or was he Greek? In any case, a long time ago.
7th century BC, you said. I mean, 7th century before the Christian era.
He decided, well, if we make penalties really, really severe, no one will commit any crimes. So that was his theory anyway, and
so that's been synonymous with harsh justice ever since, draconian methods.
Yeah, but what I would suggest is look at the science, because there is some science on this, and the science is from studies, and we know, for instance, from studies that when you have a more relaxed rules, as in the Netherlands, you have lower rates of crime, lower rates of drug use. If you treat addicts like people with the disease, if you treat people who are mentally ill, we have a ding ward. They call it a ding ward in the L.A. County Jail because we're the second largest city, and we've got I don't know, maybe a couple of thousand people in county jail, who've been picked up for doing things they wouldn't have done if they weren't ill, like urinating on the sidewalk or something like that. And they're all in a one ward of the county jail. There may be 1,000 or 2,000 of them, something like that, and they're mentally ill, and no one's treating them. They're truly warehouse. They're just put away for a while, and they're getting no treatment. And many of them are schizophrenics, and we have better treatment for schizophrenia now. They don't have to be there warehoused like that. A lot of them can be helped, and a lot of these drug addicts can be helped. So if you go with the science, what works and what doesn't work, that would be my suggestion, because there is science on this.
Right.
And that we've done studies. One of a great study was the Stanford experiment, which is they did an experiment in Stanford with students where some of them played inmates and some of them played prison guards, and they put them in a lab setting. I forget what they wanted to find out, and they had to stop the experiment because inside of something like 48 to 72 hours, many of the prison guards had turned sadistic,
right,
and were actually torturing
and that's
some of the inmates.
Yeah, and that's similar to that experiment where they use the teacher and the student, and they give them they deliver the shock. And it's actually an experiment. The teacher doesn't know that it's not really a shock, and the person's screaming and saying, "Please stop!" And the teacher keeps giving him the shock, more and more volts. And
because they're told to.
And they're told, and it's just this fear of this need to be in authority. Well, we're gonna have to stop there.
When you look at that, you say, well, prison guards maybe aren't so bad, because they're just taking everyday people and turning them into monsters.
So how do people
when they give them that power? Power corrupts.
Right.
So I look at the science. What works? What doesn't work?
We've just spent the last hour with Ivan Goldman. How do people get a hold of Ivan Goldman if they want to know more about you? You got a website?
Well, thanks for asking, George. The best way to find me is just find me on Amazon. There's an author's page, Ivan G. Goldman, Goldman. I have to, everybody tells me I should get my own internet site, but that serves as my internet site.
Perfect.
You look on Amazon, Goldman, Ivan G, and you will find me, and you'll find all my books and a lot about me.
Well, great. Thanks for
more than you want to know, more than I want to know.
Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and keep it up with the good books. This is
George. It's been a pleasure, and I enjoy being interviewed by somebody who knows what he's talking about, and that definitely is you.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you very much. So that's great. Well, then you have a great afternoon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that was our show with Ivan G. Goldman, and his book is Sick Justice Inside the American Gulag. I'm George Yates. The last hour we've been here on my show, Justice for All. And I thank you all for joining me. And as you know, those of you who have been listening to my show know that I've been on the air now for about 18 months. And it's been a real pleasure to be on the show, be on the air here at 1650. I'm going to take a break here for a few weeks. Got a lot of other projects that I want to work on, and so I'm going to take a little sabbatical from my show for a while, but we will be back on the air soon. In the meantime, there'll be other programming on Saturday afternoons until we bring our show back. But you can hear all my past shows on my website at www.ghylaw.com. We're going to upload that show from Ivan Goldman to my website. And I also have a YouTube channel, George Yates, hosting Justice for All. And you can listen to all my shows going all the way back to, Sarah Bloom, up to the present over the course of the last 18 months. We'll be back on the air soon. But in the meantime, you all have a great afternoon out there. And thank you for joining me. And just have a great day out there. www.ghylaw.com to listen to all of our back shows. And this is Justice for All. I'm George Yates. Have a great day now. Bye.